For most of us, a mortgage is the single biggest financial step we'll ever take. And it feels kind of modern, a little bureaucratic, maybe even boring. But what if I told you the story of your mortgage is this epic, centuries-long drama? We're talking fraud, financial meltdowns, and some absolutely brilliant innovations. Its history is way, way more surprising than you think. So let's just start with the name itself. The word mortgage actually comes to us from Latin and Old French, and its a literal translation: death pledge. I'm not kidding, a death pledge. It sounds pretty grim, right? Well, that's because in its earliest days, this was a very, very serious and often incredibly risky promise. Okay, so why the super dark name? What exactly made this whole thing a death pledge? Well, to get that answer, we have to go way further back in time than you'd probably expect. What's really wild here is just how ancient this idea is. Historians have dug up documents from the Tang Dynasty, we're talking over 1,000 years ago, showing Sogdian traders on the Silk Road mortgaging their property and even their slaves. The word itself doesn't pop up in English until 1283. But get this, even by the 1770s, it was still this chaotic, informal system built on, well, not much more than trust and a prayer. And that right there brings us to the single biggest roadblock that held mortgages back for literally centuries: the really fundamental problem of ownership. I mean, think about it for a second. A mortgage is just a loan that's secured by a piece of property. But what happens when there's no official, reliable way to prove who actually owns what? How can a lender be sure that the guy asking for a loan on a farm really owns that farm? Without a solid system, it was a total recipe for chaos and fraud. Oh, and you want a crazy story? Look at this guy, Elisha Cornwell. Back in 1778, he sold his farm on credit. The buyer, who hadn't even paid for it yet, immediately went and mortgaged the exact same farm to someone else to get some quick cash. And then he did it again. Cornwell's only option, his only recourse, was to take out a newspaper ad to warn people. That was the system. So yeah, clearly the world needed to get away from a system of just hearsay and newspaper ads and move to one based on legal fact. The huge breakthrough finally came from Germany in 1872 with its Grundbuch law. It was genius. They created a central government registry, a single book, that definitively said who owned what property. This was the rock-solid foundation that allowed a real national mortgage market to finally take off. So the ownership problem gets solved, and mortgages start to become a lot more common as we head into the 20th century. But they were still incredibly risky, especially for families. And this led to a brand new crisis that would end up reshaping everything all over again: the Great Depression. See, before the 1930s, the typical mortgage was basically a financial time bomb. You'd get a really short-term loan, maybe 5 years, and you'd only pay the interest every month. But then at the very end, the entire principal, this massive balloon payment, was due all at once. Everybody just assumed you'd get a new loan. But during the Depression, unemployment was at 25%, property values were plummeting, the banks just said, nope, no new loan for you. Millions of families were suddenly facing foreclosure. The US government absolutely had to step in. So in 1934, the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, pushed a financial innovation that is now totally standard: the long-term amortizing mortgage. Your payment is the same for 15 or 30 years, and every single month you pay down both the interest and a little piece of the principal. There's no giant balloon payment, no family crisis at the end. It created stability where there had been total chaos. Okay, so we've got a much safer product. That's great. But that just created a whole new challenge. For this thing to work all across the country, you need a massive, constant river of money for banks to lend out. So how do you create that? Here's the core of the problem. Your local bank only has a certain amount of money from its depositors, right? So once it lends all that money out as 30-year mortgages, it's stuck. It has to wait for all those payments to slowly trickle back in before it can make any new loans. The whole system just grinds to a halt. The solution was another groundbreaking government innovation, this time from 1938, the creation of the Federal National Mortgage Association, which everyone just calls Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae's job was simple but brilliant: buy mortgages from the banks, creating what's called a secondary market. A bank makes a loan, immediately sells it to Fannie Mae, gets all its cash back right away, and can then lend that money to the next family. It turned a tiny pipe into an absolute fire hose of capital. And this incredibly powerful system, it fueled American home ownership for more than half a century. But this complex chain, this system designed to spread money all around, it also spread risk in ways that nobody really understood until the whole thing came crashing down in 2008. So this created a huge problem. The person who originally made the mortgage could approve a really risky loan, sell it off into that secondary market just days later, and then, poof, wash their hands of it. The risk got passed on to some investor, far, far away. It's the classic moral hazard, right? There's no incentive to be careful. Some brokers were even encouraging people to lie about their income just so they could close the deal and sell the loan. So, after the 2008 crisis, regulators in both the US and Europe came up with a pretty simple but really powerful solution. The Dodd-Frank Act made it a rule that the people who originate the mortgage have to keep at least 5% of the risk. They can sell off 95%, sure, but they have to keep a piece of the action. It gives them skin in the game, a very clear financial reason to make sure the borrower can actually pay the loan back.
So, from its ancient beginnings as a literal death pledge, all the way to the complex global market we have today, the history of the mortgage is this constant tug of war between access and safety. The systems we've built have put the keys to a new home in the hands of millions. The challenge, the thing we are still wrestling with, is how do we harness all that incredible, innovative power without getting burned?